Um, Let me. It's always a pleasure to be here. What I would like to present is a lot of data relating to inequality, because I think that all of you should be interested in inequality if you're here, right? And in particular, I'm going to talk about how inequality really starts early on and continues through someone's adolescence. I usually say that when Piketty was giving the book and there was so much emphasis on the top 1%, I thought that that was a little bit misguided until I understood that most of the reporters that were reporting on what Piketty wrote actually were in the top 10%. So they didn't want to say that they actually were benefiting tremendously from inequality. But this is, instead of showing the top 1%, I'm going to start by showing the share of income and how it has evolved over time for the top 10%. Okay, so this is stuff that Piketty himself in the book showed, and other researchers as well have been talking about this for a long time. And yes, so if you go back to the beginning of the 20th century, what you're going to see is that the top decile families in the United States got about 40% of the income. It goes down post-World War, it stays about there until 1980s, and then it starts to increase. And now it's as high as, it's actually a little bit higher from where we began, okay? So it's not a phenomenon that is exclusively for the top 1%, it's the top 10%, the top 20%, even the top 30%, okay? When I was in graduate school, a lot of people were talking about this phenomenon that was emerging as skill bias technical change, right? So the idea is there is going to be supply of skills increasing over time, and there's going to be the demand of skills increasing over time. And if they were all increasing at the same rates over time, what I have in here is the relative stocks of skills, skilled to unskilled labor, and what I have here are the relative skill premium. This is how much more you get because you have high skill versus low skill. If the relative stocks of skills and demand and supply were growing exactly the same rate, what we should have seen is the skill premium should be actually flat because they're growing exactly the same rate, right? When I was in graduate school, the typical explanation for this increase in inequality was the explanation of skill bias technical change. That what happened was pretty much the supply of skills had been growing exactly the same rate, but suddenly because of because we invented computing and all of these IT technologies, the demand for skilled labor actually started increasing at a faster rate. And that was a very compelling explanation because it actually was consistent with inequality. So here, as you can see, the supply of skills is still growing exactly the same rate, but in more recent years, what you have is this demand curve shifting out at a faster rate. Yeah. Now, obviously, another possible explanation that a few people recognized at the time, that even in the early 1990s, was that maybe it's not that the supply, maybe it's not the demand is growing really fast. Maybe it's that the speed of supply actually has not been growing as fast as it had in previous years, in previous decades. And that would lead to exactly the same thing that we see in the data. Okay? So you have two competing explanations that lead to exactly the same phenomenon that we observe. Nowadays, we believe that we have evidence that supports the story of human capital not being produced as fast as in the past, than the story of the demand for human capital increasing at a faster rate. Let me show you a few pictures. So this is college graduation rates. This is from the book by Godin and Katz. This is what you have here is the fraction of individuals from a generation, from a birth year that actually graduated from college. This is their birth year. What you see here is for many years for about 40 years, you have this growth rate that is relatively small. Then you have this really high, fast growth rate of skills being produced in the United States as measured by the fraction of individuals who graduate from college. Then for males, it starts just fluctuating. Now we are about as high as we were in the most recent years. And for females, it fluctuated, it stabilized for a few years and then it took over, right? So a lot of the skills that are being produced, they're being produced because females are going to college and graduating from college at higher rates than males, okay? But as you can see here is low growth rate of the supply of skills, fast growth rate of the supply of skills, and then a lower growth rate for the supply of skills, okay? So a lot of people, when they see this picture, their first reaction is, oh, we have to actually make sure that people go to college. We have to improve college access policies, right? Even in the last presidential election, there were people talking about we need to make college, community colleges free. It's not like we haven't actually done that in terms of, the college access. So this is enrolling in college. It's different from graduating from college. And what you see is a picture that is a little bit different. It still has low growth rate, fast growth rate, and a slower growth rate. But now 80% of the females are actually enrolling in some form of a college, in some form of post-secondary school. But only about 45% of them are actually graduating. And males, about 70% of them are enrolling into college, but only about 35% of them are actually graduating from college. So conditional on graduating, conditional enrolling, graduation rates for males actually is at a low point. For females, it's interesting. They were never going to college as often as males, so they started going to college more often and they graduated more often as actually they entered into college. So the picture that arises here is this notion that at least for males, college access has not guaranteed higher graduation rates, okay? And the issue is who is graduating at the margin, okay? So this is Caroline Hawksby paper, 2009, on the change in selectivity of colleges. So most of you came from that top figure that you see there. Those are selective institutions in 1962. The median, the typical guy in the most selective institutions in 1962, they were scoring close to 90% of the SAT exam. Okay? So think about this. You are going to college. If you're going to college to an institution like that, you're going to college with the smartest people in the US. Okay? Over time, what has happened with those institutions? They've become even more selective. So now, the typical person who goes to that university, to those universities, they are scoring the 97th percentile of the SAT. And if the typical person is scoring the 97th percentile, you can imagine that the variance is going to be also very small because the variance is P times 1 minus P. If P is 0.97, 1 minus P is 0.03, this is going to be a small number. So it's individuals that are scoring really very high, and they are really very homogeneous group in terms of cognitive skills. Okay? On the other hand, at the other side of the market, what you have are institutions that were never as selective. Okay? So these were institutions that were scoring somewhere between the typical person in 1962, they actually were scoring around the 60th percentile. Okay? And these were the universities. These were where we created the vacancies. Okay? So we have this strange market in which you have the highly selective institutions. They have increased the number of seats that they offer, but they have increased very little. But the demand for those seats has increased tremendously. So the typical guy has become more selective, the one that goes in there. And a lot of the access policy that we pursued was access policy by increasing access to universities that were never very selective. And what's going on over time is that they're becoming even less selective. Okay? So we pursued a policy of trying to increase college graduation by, at the margin, increasing access to people that were not as college ready, going to institutions that were not as selective as the institutions that produced people that were very likely to graduate from college. Okay? So this is, a lot of people still try to do more of this. I think that the data shows that this is probably not a good way to go, okay, if you want to reduce inequality. By the way, this is a picture that is every year is the OECD produces this picture. And every year, the United States goes down another position in the ranking. So this is a very confusing picture. Let me help you with this. So what you have here, two different cohorts. One, this dot here, what it is the cohort of individuals that were 55 to 64 in 2014. Sorry, I missed the year here. And the triangle is the cohort of individuals that were 25 to 34 with tertiary education in 2014. So what you see here is that these guys here, the 55 to 64, in 1984 they were 25 to 34 years old too. So when you look at the United States in 1980s, very few countries actually had higher fraction of the population with a college. Sorry. Oh, it wants me to check online. Not now. Sorry about this. So in the 1980s, very few countries had as many individuals as a fraction of the cohort with some form of post-secondary training. Over time, a lot of these countries actually surpassed the United States. Look at Korea. So it started in 1980s, it had about 13-14% of the cohort with some post-secondary degree. Now it's close to 65%, okay? So this is very problematic for the United States. So this notion that inequality is increasing, it's increasing a lot because of this story here, that we're failing to produce skills, okay? So let me show to you what are the consequences of this. So this is a very simple model that was postulated by Katz and Murphy in the 1990s when they started talking about this issue of the supply of skilled labor. So here's the situation. I have an aggregate economy. You should think of Y as the GDP of the economy, for those who are not economists in the room. And I can produce GDP using skilled labor and using unskilled labor. Let's forget about machines for a second. The crucial thing about this mathematical expression here is this parameter phi. Phi is telling you how easy it is to substitute or to replace skilled labor with unskilled labor. Okay? If it is easy to replace skilled labor with unskilled labor, then the story that the supply of skills is not increasing over time shouldn't have a lot of consequences for wage premium. Because guess what? If the skills are being demanded, it's easy to replace a skilled labor with unskilled labor. Therefore, there shouldn't be a reason why the prices of skilled labor would increase so fast. On the other hand, as phi becomes a very small number, and phi can be as small as minus infinity, then you are in trouble because it's really impossible to substitute skilled labor with unskilled labor. And if you have the demand for skills growing exactly the same speed in the last decades, but the supply of skills starts to increase at a slower rate, and it's impossible or very difficult to substitute unskilled labor and skilled labor, then what you're going to see, what you should see is that the premium for having skills actually is increasing over time. So this is, again, going back to Goldie and Katz, what you're going to see is this inequality. And by the way, here's the premium. This is what we mean by the premium. It's the ratio of the hourly wage for skilled workers divided and the wages for unskilled workers. And this is where phi is going to be so important. If phi is equal to 1, perfect substitutes, the ratio here doesn't really matter because it's easy to replace one with the other. But if phi goes to minus infinity, differences in these things will actually have huge consequences for the way we think about, for what we see about the wage rates, okay? This is what they actually compiled, Goldie and Katz. So in the period of high inequality, wage premium was actually high. In the period in which inequality is actually going down, wage premium is going down. In the period in which inequality starts to increase again, wage premium starts to increase again. So Piketty tried to frame all of the increasing inequality exclusively as an issue of capital income. Actually, that's true. There is some capital income inequality associated with inequality as we see it. But a lot of the inequality that happens at the top 10%, at the top 20%, and the top 30% is actually due to inequality in human capital, inequality in skills. Okay? So the question is, if we want to pursue policies that are going to reduce inequality, how do we do them? Okay? So let me show to you what is college readiness. Okay? So this is a paper by Heckman, Stixrud, and Ursula that was published a few years ago. People have been going back to the data and collecting better data. I'm going to refer to other studies in a few slides, but let me go back to this older study because it's a little bit more comprehensive. So what I plot in here are two forms of skills. One is the decile, one are the cognitive skills. This is basically being measured on how well you do in IQ type tests. So if you've taken an IQ type test, you know that this is about recognizing shapes. You know, they have all of these they give you like, they show you one picture, they give you like 5 options, and they say, what is the shape that fits in here? Usually IQ tests are not going to have something that is based on knowledge. They're not going to ask you to solve a math problem. They're not going to ask you to solve, you know, they're not going to ask you a definition of vocabulary. So it's not like the GRE, if you've taken the GRE. It's something supposed to be different. And this is what they hope that they are picking up in here. In practice, this is not exclusively IQ because this is measured with the Army battery of tests. And the Army battery of tests does have some of these components that I described to you. The typical one would be coding speed. They ask you to translate letters into numbers, and then they ask you, okay, write this letter, house, only using numbers. And then if you can do 100 versus 50, you're going to score a lot higher than someone that does 50, okay? Now, socio-emotional skills is, we don't have good names for those skills. We started calling them not cognitive skills, turned out to be a horrible name. Then we changed to socio-emotional skills, it turned out to be an even more horrible name. And then sometimes we refer to them as character, and it's also very bad. So there is no good name for what I am telling you. Over time, it's funny because this is the 3rd year that I give this lecture. So if you go to YouTube, I'm going to say not cognitive skills is horrible. And then nowadays I think not cognitive is actually not horrible. But it's cognitive. The reason why I don't like calling them non-cognitive skills, I'm going to show it to you in a few slides, is because part of it is actually highly cognitive. And you're going to see examples of that in a few seconds. In their study here, the way that they are measuring these non-cognitive socio-emotional skills is primarily through something that is called locus of control. Locus of control is a very old measure. It goes back 50 years ago. And the idea there was trying to see, do I have control over things that happen in my life, or don't I have control over things that happen in my life? You know, they ask you, you know, if you graduate from college, do you graduate from college because you worked hard or because you were lucky? Okay? And people who tend to score high on locus of control are people that say, I have a lot of control on things that happen in my life. And then people who score low are people that say, no, almost everything that happens to me is random bad luck or random good luck. Okay? So I have almost no control over my life. It turns out that this is research going back to the 1950s, that people that have high internal locus of control were individuals that were very highly achieving. They were working very hard because they believed that if they worked hard, they could actually achieve a lot of things. So then they went on to having these different definitions of, you know, individuals that want to achieve power, achieve money, achieve success, and so on and so forth. So this is one measure that they have here, this locus of control, going back 50 years. And then another one that is even older, which is some measure of actually depression. They call it self-esteem, but it's more a measure of depression. What is tricky here about this study is, if I am unsuccessful, yeah, go ahead.
How do I actually think that? Do you think that it's really picking up whether I think that I have a lot of control over my life, or is it people that are generally really successful say that I'm successful because of me.
Yeah.
And that people that are
So reverse causality,
say
right?
I'm successful because of bad luck. So really all it's picking up is some measure of success.
Yeah, so that's a great question. Here they're going to be, you can imagine that if I am very successful, I'm going to say I'm successful because I'm so good. And if I'm not very successful, I'm going to say I'm not successful because there are all of these people working against me, so it doesn't matter what I do, right? So when you see these pictures, you should be worried about reverse causality for sure. But it's not as bad because the measures here are taken when they are 15. We're looking at outcomes when they are 30, okay? So it might be that it's super...
It's picking up something. It's picking up something else that makes the person successful.
Exactly.
But what it is,
We don't know.
Anything.
No, exactly. So here's the rule of the game. So right now I'm going to show you a lot of... Right now I'm going to show to you a lot of correlational stuff. So you should have in the back of your mind, you should always doubt everyone who's going to be standing here. Do not give them the benefit of the doubt. What I'm going to do, so right now, I'm going to show you all of these correlation studies, okay? Then I'm going to show to you interventions. I'm going to have an intervention that is going to affect the quality of the environment. It's going to affect the skills that are going to be formed. And I'm going to go back and say, when we change these skills because of the intervention from a randomized controlled trial, do we change the outcomes? Okay? So right now I want to convince you first that college readiness is the product of skills that are both cognitive skills and not cognitive skills. And maybe the not cognitive skills are more important than the cognitive skills, which is a real problem if this is true, because if you think about the way we talk about education policy, it's all standardized testing, right? Based on stuff that looks a lot more cognitive skills than non-cognitive skills, okay? So right now you're right. You should be concerned about reverse causality here. You should be concerned about having a third variable that is explaining why these people are successful and why they have these, but I'll go back to that, okay? Okay, so what you see here, and Rosenberg is even worse than locus of control because Rosenberg is really depression. So if I'm not successful, you can imagine the world in which I'm not successful and therefore very depressed. So what is causing what? Is depression causing no success or no success causing depression, right? So you should have those questions in the back of your mind. I'm going to come back to them, to address them. Yeah, go ahead.
Just a quick question.
No, it doesn't need to be quick. Do not give me the benefit of the doubt. Doubt anything that I'm saying, because otherwise it's not fun for me.
Maybe I missed it, but how do we define a successful person?
Great question. I'm going to define successful person. No, not only money. That's a great question. It's not only money, but this is a deeper philosophical question. Amartya Sen has written a lot about what constitutes, how should we even do policy in a world in which the only thing that matters is not only money, right? I'm going to have in the back of your mind all of this work by Amartya Sen. I'm not going to refer to it, but in the back of my mind I'm thinking inequalities, when you now start looking at inequality not only in terms of outcome, but in terms of life expectancy, in terms of access to basic services like access to health, right? Then the picture becomes even more problematic. Okay? And I think that all of them, to some extent, are linked back to the problem of not forming enough skills that don't give them the access and the tools that they actually need to achieve all of those things. So there is work that has been done in terms of, if you get people more educated, you get them to advocate more for their own rights. Okay? So, but I'm not going to go there. Happy to have that conversation. Okay, so I don't know if you know Shen's work on capabilities.
Yeah,
Is that what you had in mind?
And other writers. It's just, it seems like you were saying that success, because that's what you just said, that successful people,
Yeah.
in whichever way we define success, have more access to healthcare, have more access to, a better education.
They live more fulfilling lives.
Yes, because their
But
jobs
yeah.
allow them to do that, and I think in today's market, those who get to the top are the ones who are very self-centered, individualistic, and who have the skills to compete in a very, very tough market. So that's why why I was confused, like what makes a successful person? The fact that I can just,
Yeah, so
act like a Wall Street banker?
no, not necessarily. No, not necessarily. I don't want this to degenerate in a life of banking account, for sure. It's fulfilling lives, right? So here's the thing. No. This is a super important question because I think that this is an issue that economists tend to overlook a lot. So let me take the opportunity to do this. In an ideal world, if someone wants to be a carpenter, it's a problem if they can't be a carpenter because they don't have opportunity to become a carpenter. It's not a problem if they don't become a carpenter if they don't want to become a carpenter. Okay? Now, going around trying to identify how you can measure each one of the reasons why people who want to become carpenters don't become carpenters is super hard. So this is why this becomes, and when I mean by philosophical, I don't mean that it's less important. I mean that it's a very deep discussion that is super important, but we still lack the tools to actually define that in a meaningful way. Okay? No, I even mean that in the sense of a quantitative meaning. Okay? So how many individuals in the world would like to become carpenters, but they have not become carpenters because they actually couldn't, even though they wanted to? We don't know the number of each one of those. And if I go across, and maybe someone doesn't want to become a carpenter, maybe someone wants to have the father of 7 children and all of his children he wants all of his children to be very happy in some dimension that he defines it. I'm very sympathetic, but as a scientist, we also need to come up with ways that we can measure things objectively for public policy. Otherwise, we can't make progress on separating what's a policy that is going the direction we would like the world to go as a society, not as scientists, because that's a choice of the society, versus a world in which we're going in the opposite direction. Okay? So it's not perfect, I agree with you. And I shouldn't actually use the word success here. I should be more strict in saying that what we are talking about is economic inequality, and what I want to show to you is that this economic inequality is, to some extent, inequality in opportunities, but not inequality in opportunities to enroll in college. It's a deeper source of inequality of opportunities. Okay? So that's the discussion that I want to have. So you had a question, yeah.
So, how do you distinguish between the idea of the locus of control compared to, say, self-motivation? Are they generally the same idea? Or
So this is a very strange world. I'll tell you why. Because a lot of times, scientists who work on non-cognitive skills, they're going to come up with a new measure of non-cognitive skill. And then they're going to interview people, collect data, and then they're going to say, this predicts this predicts that. But many times what's unclear to me is whether the new non-cognitive skill is really something new, or is it just a convex combination of skills that actually were already measured, but maybe in separate ways. So I don't know. So motivation, part of locus of control is motivation. There is some correlation there. Part of self-esteem has correlation with the depression, actually a lot of correlation with the depression scales. But as you go across all of these different traits, I think that we have not had the discipline to say, oh, this is just a linear combination of all of these, maybe a nonlinear combination of all those skills that were measured in the past. It's even worse than that. Many times, what they're going to do is the following. I'm going to create a new concept of non-cognitive skill. Then I'm going to go to the field and test it. And then I'm going to collect data on some other non-cognitive skill that I think is related to it. And then I'm going to say, oh, there is a correlation. And then I'm going to look at what items in my scale are leading to the correlation. Then I'm going to drop the items that are leading to the correlation. And then I claim I created this new skill. It's not correlated with anything else. But of course not, because you dropped all the items that were correlated with other skills that were already measured. And now that you have this new skill, we don't know if it's going to be as predictive of other social outcomes as a linear combination of the other ones. Okay, so I think that unfortunately, I don't see a lot of progress on trying to say, here are all these skills that we should be measuring. And part of the problem is I still think that we have a hard problem even measuring these skills that we know exist. Okay, so maybe I'll have time to talk about it, maybe I will not. But what you see here is, this is graduating from high school versus dropping out of high school. Not too surprising to you, the higher you are in the distribution of cognitive skills, the higher the likelihood you're going to graduate from high school. The higher you are in the distribution of non-cognitive skills, the higher the chance you're going to graduate from high school. The same is going to be true if you compare graduation from high school and college enrollment, or finishing only some college, like a 2-year college, or finishing a 4-year degree. But it's also wages, it's also smoking, it's also participation in elections, it's also whether you're going to have a white-collar occupation, it's also whether you're going to go to jail or not. And what's really surprising is non-cognitive skills moving from the bottom quintile to the second smallest quintile has huge impact on reducing participation in crime and going to jail. And it's also the same for pregnancy during adolescence. Okay? So all of those things, all of these skills are now predicting outcomes that we care about as a society, right? But in the question, in the back of your mind, you should have the question, what's causing what? And is it really causal, okay? Now, here's yeah, go ahead.
Can you say something about the measurement error?
Oh, it's horrible. I deleted these slides. So let me put it like this. A lot of times people worry about endogeneity. This question has already happened. Measurement error, I believe, based on everything that I've seen and I've done in this area, is the bias that is caused by measurement error when you try to regress an outcome on each one of those measures is far greater than the bias that happens because of the endogeneity. Okay, so at least given my experience on this topic, I want you to think the following way. The typical measures of cognitive skills that people like so much, they are not so bad. The signal-to-noise ratio is about 80%, meaning 80% of the variability in scores is actually true variability in skills. 20% is measurement error. 20% is already a large bias, okay? It leads to a large bias if you run a simple OLS regression. For socio-emotional skills, the typical signal-to-noise ratio is 40%, okay? And I'm going to show to you investments in human capital, the signal-to-noise ratio is about 10%. Okay? So 90% of the scales that we actually use are to measure investments in children and in adolescents are actually noise. 10% is true signal. Okay? And investment is even worse, and I'm going to show it to you, because it's not like addressing measurement error using classical methods, assuming that it's a classical measurement error, is actually not good, because I'm going to show you that it's actually very bad form of measurement error. It's the worst kind that you can actually have. Okay, so if one of you, I say that all the time, actually can solve the issue of measuring skills and measuring investments in human capital, you should win 6 Nobel Prizes. One in medicine, one in physics. Okay, so because this is a real large problem. So I'm going to show to you if I have time. I might not show you. I had to delete some slides. Yeah, go ahead.
How correlated are the cognitive and non-cognitive skills? Are they almost correlated?
So this is the problem, right? A lot of people, when they construct the measures of non-cognitive skills, they say, oh, if it correlates with cognitive skills, I'm going to find the items in my scale that lead to that correlation, and I'm going to discard them. So, which to me is a problem, because you should, if you have a theoretical concept that you want to implement in practice, who cares if this is actually correlated with cognitive skills? So a lot of these skills that you see nowadays by construction, they are actually they have very low correlation with cognitive skills. Yeah.
Just a quick question, I already said, can I use the word emotional intelligence to describe non-cognitive skills?
maybe you can, but
Is it too loaded?
I don't know if it's too loaded. See, maybe next year I'll be sympathetic to that term. I was sympathetic to it 2 years ago. So really, I mean, really is because it's not a lot of it is actually emotional in the sense of some of it is. Some of it is, you know, you say something to me, I start punching you, right? So you actually think that I'm kidding, but you go to certain schools, public schools in the United States. Unfortunately, that's the reality. Simple exchanges, verbal exchanges lead to violent aggression. So part of it is really emotional. Part of it is not emotional in the sense that I have the capacity to focus on something. Okay, so I'm not going to, see, this is where I think this is highly cognitive. This is why I don't think it's socio-emotional. It's also the one that leads to people scoring very high on cognitive skills. I know one person who took a cognitive test and told me that he is really very intelligent. The reason why he scored 1 standard deviation below the mean was because he couldn't focus on the test, which I believe is true if you can't focus on a very boring test. Because taking a cognitive, like take the Raven progressive matrix, matrices when you go back to your room tonight, it's going to be 2 hours of tremendous boredom. Okay, and this is what we actually ask people to do when they're doing these scales. It's super boring. So you can actually, one of the studies that are most fascinating is you can greatly affect how well people are going to do in the Raven progressive matrix by giving them an incentive. I'm going to give you $1 for each question you get right. People that were scoring really very low, suddenly they started scoring really very high because now they had an incentive to focus. You know who these guys were? The guys that actually moved, they were scoring really very low on impulse control scales of non-cognitive skills. Okay, so they were high on IQ, they were low on impulse control. When you paid them to do something, they said, okay, so I can do it. I'm smart. I can focus on the money and just answer the questions. Okay. Now here is what I was showing to you were how inequality at age 14 and 15, because the measures that I told you were taken when kids were 15 years old. Go ahead.
I still have a question about the measurement.
Sure.
So in the other paper, the Heckman and Yozua, they use a factor model.
Yes.
And they say that it attenuates measurement error.
Yes.
What do you think?
So I think that this is for cognitive skills and for non-cognitive skills. I think that this is right. For investments over time, I've become less confident about the capacity of classical measurement error to address the issue of measurement error for investments. But for cognitive skills and non-cognitive skills, I think that that's okay because there's no evidence. I'm going to go back to that point. You're going to see exactly what I'm talking about. Okay. So here is I hope, but here is the inequality at age 15. This is 1 standard deviation in a math test. So these are the kids of the guys you just saw, okay? And the good thing about looking at the guys their kids is that you can go back all the way to birth for them, okay? So this is difference. So here are 2 groups, 4 groups. These are groups of the parents' permanent income. And permanent income, I mean some form of average income over many, many years of the child's life, okay? So those guys there are the high income parents. They are high income for 15 years of the child's life, from age 0 to age 14. These are the low income guys. Those are the guys in between. When the kids are 14 years old, the difference in the math test is about 1 standard deviation. Okay? This is larger than black-white gaps in test scores. Okay? Now what's interesting is because you follow these kids all the way to birth, you can see that this is basically parallel. This difference is basically parallel all the way to age 5, right? So not much of a movement here. The difference here is 80% of a standard deviation versus 1 standard deviation over here. And then at age 3, this difference is about 40% of a standard deviation. Now, here is where you start having this issue of measurement error, right? So think about asking a 3-year-old to take a test, right? And that he's going to cooperate fully with you when taking the test, right? And some of the tests are better and some of the tests are worse. But a natural question that arises here is this inequality shrinking just because of different forms of measurement error that are more serious because of the technology? Part of it is, but part of it is not. So this is a very interesting study done by two psychologists over a period of 10 years, Hart and Risley. Many of you have already seen this, I'm sure. But this is a painful study to be done. Every time I think of my studies and it's taking so long for me to get the data, I think of these guys. This is what they did. When kids were born, they actually enrolled the parents in a study. The study was, I'm going to send a research assistant to your home for 1 hour a month, and this research assistant is going to have a tape recorder, and this research assistant will follow your child. Wherever your child goes, the research assistant will go with the tape recorder. Then we're going to bring the tape recorder back to the lab, and we're going to transcribe everything that happens in the tape recorder. So all the words that the child spoke, all the words that adults spoke to the child, or the adults spoke to each other, we're going to count all of that stuff. So 3 years to collect the data, 10 years to analyze it. So this is, and nowadays we can do it with technology that greatly surpasses it. But Hart and Risley are now dead, so they are not too upset. So here's what happened. This is the cumulative vocabulary words. What I'm saying here is I'm going to create a spreadsheet for each one of these kids. The spreadsheet is going to be 9 months, 10 months. The columns are going to be 9 months, 10 months, 11 months, 12 months, so on and so forth. And in the rows, I'm going to list the words that they have already spoken. Okay? Even if they are very hard for you to understand, if I can understand them and other two research assistants can also understand, we can agree on the meaning, I'm just going to list the number of different words. So you come to my home, I'm 9 months old, I say, Mom, it's one word. When it's 10 months old, you come and I say Mom and Pop, it's 2 words. And you come, the next month and I say Mom, 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 Pop, 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 car, it's 3 words. Spoken many times, but only 3 different words, okay? And over time, what you see is, obviously, when the kids are 10 months old, 9, 10 months old, not much that they are saying that the research assistants can agree it's a word. The moms will say, no cookie for you right now. I don't know why the moms knew it's cookie, but the research assistants couldn't agree that it was cookie. And over time, the inequality starts to show up. By the time that the 6 welfare children were 36 months old, they had their vocabulary size was the vocabulary size of the children of the professional parents when they were 24 months old. So by age 36 months in language development, there is already 1 year difference in language development. Okay? Now, you may say they all learned to talk, which is true, but the ability to engage in complex conversations actually depends on your language development. Okay? So this is the work by a lot of linguists, in particular Anne Fernald at Stanford, that shows that even by age 6, 7, 8, children with inferior language development at age 3, they take a lot more time to recognize the words that are saying to them. Okay? And these are objective words describing objective things, not describing abstract thoughts. Okay? And the same thing is going to be true for socio-emotional skills. Here it's antisocial behavior, which is a measure of how violent people, not violent, but whether they want to engage with other people or not. Here it's the opposite. If you score high on antisocial, it's not a good thing. And instead of looking at deviations from the mean, just producing the percentile scores, but what you can see is these are the high-income children. The blue one is the low-income children. Differences that you see at age 12, they're already present by the time that they're age 4 years old. Okay? So health, the same thing. So this is the gradient for health. This is a little bit of a different picture. Case, Lubotsky, and Paxson, instead of age, what they are plotting in here is family income. Here is maternal report of the child's health. This is the gap. So as you see here, high-income children have close to excellent health by the time that they are 3 years old, 0 to 3 years old. Low-income children, they are not excellent. They're already scoring 2. Over time, this gap increases. But most of the difference is already there by the time that the kids are 0 to 3 years old. In other words, here's what I mean. The difference between high and low income children is when they are 13 to 17 years old, is the difference between 2.25 and roughly 1.5. Most of this difference is already present, right? 2/3 of this difference is already present by the time that they are 0 to 3 years old. It increases from 0.5 to 0.75, but most of the difference already is there, okay? So inequality starts early. The inequality that leads to who goes to college, it starts early. What I'm going to show to you is, and it continues over time. And what I'm going to show to you now is that this inequality is correlated. Remember, I still have to prove causality in what I'm doing. Is correlated with differences in investments from birth all the way to college. Okay. So this is. Let me skip this. I should have taken this out. Sorry. So here is Hart and Risley. Hart and Risley. Back to Hart and Risley. Hart and Risley thought of, at the time they didn't have, it was only theory. It wasn't very clear that the following was true. They believed that language development occurs because of adult-child interaction. Okay? So they believed that you couldn't learn language from TV because the TV doesn't offer you the feedback. So when you say you've seen situations in which, and I'm sure that it happened with you when you were young, and it happens to me to this day because I'm not an English speaker, not a native one, you're going to say a word, children will say a word, and then the parents will say, that's not the way we use the word, right? Right? And it happens with me all the time. Chris corrects me a lot. So if you go back to the tapes, there was a year that every 5 words that I would say, Chris said, it's not true, this is not the way you say it. So I've improved a little, but I'm still not 100%. I'm just kidding, Chris. So here's what, but it is true though. Nowadays there are studies by Patricia Kuhl, who is a neuroscientist, trying to teach US-born babies Mandarin, okay? And if you actually give, if you pair the baby with a nanny who happens to be fluent in Mandarin, the baby will learn Mandarin. If you put the baby in front of a TV showing the same nanny, speaking Mandarin, the baby will not learn Mandarin. So it's this social interaction that actually leads to brain development, particularly because we need the feedback to acquire the language skills. Okay? So what you see here is, this is the words addressed to the child. Okay? So during this hour, 1 hour per month. And by the way, they went to the homes at a high talking time. It's usually around dinner time for the baby. Okay? I'm speaking to you at a rate of about 300 words per minute. Okay? Multiplied by 60. That's going to be the rate per hour. Look at the rates per hour for the kids. Now, obviously, they're not sitting in a class, but it's still pretty low in comparison. So this is the words per hour for the high-income group. Early on, the difference between this group and this group is close to 1,000 words per hour. Hart and Risley then did the following calculations. This is 14 hours, this is 1 hour of the 15 hours of the day times 5 years. The number of different words are going to be 30 million words, difference between the two groups. But actually they went at a high talking time because most of the day the children are actually not exposed to that amount of language anyway. So it's an order of magnitude, the difference that we estimate what it really is, but it's truly large. Okay? And over time, what happens is, these guys here are pretty much fluctuating around the same number. These guys here, the amount of language interaction is actually increasing over time. It's interesting, because it increases over time, then they reach adolescence, and what happens when they reach adolescence? What do you think happens? Huh? Based on your own experience. They're not talking to the parents, right? But what happens in here is, it's super interesting. You know why this difference opens up? is because these kids here, they have better language development. So they start more conversations. And when they start more conversations, the parents actually respond not with yes, no, but with always an answer that elicits more language from children. Okay? These children here, on the other hand, you can analyze the data. The only situation in which they win is negative meaning. Okay? So when you compare the number of times that a child was they said to a child, shut up, these guys here are going to be these guys. Be quiet, these guys here are going to be these guys. Don't talk, these guys here are going to be these guys. But in every other interaction that was positive interaction, the difference was large and in favor of these guys here. Okay? If you look at hours per day, you're going to see a little, yeah, go ahead.
I have a question on the previous slide.
Uh-huh.
So the level difference between the three groups of parents seems pretty marked, but the trend part that you're talking about for the professional parents, how confident are we that that's actually a trend and not?
Nowadays we know it's a trend because nowadays I'm going to show you the technology that we use, and now you know now what we do is 16 hours a day. We put this device, connect it to the computer, and then we can do it many times during the week, and then we see exactly what's going on. So this study, it has been replicated when it was originally done with the technology that was available in many parts of the world. So it's not a U.S. phenomenon. It's not even Western phenomenon. Okay, what really happened nowadays is that is a lot more richer than what you see here. It's not only that they talk, it's also the emotional tone, the level at which they talk to the children. These guys here are being yelled at most of the time. These guys here have nurturing voices. Oh, you're so wonderful. And this is why I believe they become so spoiled. But in almost any way that you can actually measure this, nowadays with better technology, this is what's going on. Yeah.
Do we not, like, if we put all the kids in the same daycare
Yeah.
during this period, would you see convergence? Or
They try to do that. Oh, okay. So they actually, so yes, here's what really happened. You can talk to, there are people here at the University of Chicago who did exactly what you're talking about. And I'm going to talk about that. You're going to see exactly what happens. This is the Perry Preschool program, okay? This is going to be something I'm going to show to you in a few seconds. But there is something else that happened in the last 20 years that is very telling as well. Nowadays, if a child has hearing problems, we have cochlear implant, right? Okay. So the ability, if a child was low income or high income and had hearing problems in the 1970s, language development of these two groups of children were not very different because they couldn't get the feedback. They had this problem that prevented them from having the feedback. So cochlear implant gave all of them the ability to hear. And what you see is, again, the same pattern going on. Kids, high-income kids that come from home, not necessarily high income, but kids that come from home in which parents actually engage in certain types of activities, they actually develop language very different from the kids that, you see what I'm saying? Okay. But I'm going to show to you what happened. Okay. So time, the same thing. Here is super interesting. This is also time. But think about this. If you are a 2-year-old, does it make sense to teach ordinary least squares to a 2-year-old? So think about this. Oh, let's just do an OLS regression. Right? Here are the columns, X, right? Here are the assumptions, right? And the kid would look at you like, what are you talking about, right? So what Khalil and co-authors did is the following. They looked at they are developmental psychologists. So they were trying to see, well, children go through certain stages of development. 0 to 2, it's about developing this attachment to the adult caretaker. Okay? And how do we do it? There are a lot of people that believe we are genetically programmed to talk babyese to children, right? They say, oh, you're so cute, right? So every one of us who sees a baby, we don't talk, you're so cute. We never do this, right? We always change our tone of voice, and we do this in a way. And this is nature that selected us to actually have humans that have this form of interaction that tries to establish attachment to the baby at really young age are the ones that survived. Probably because we were better at taking care of children, okay? This is theory. I don't know if this is true or not, but this is one explanation. So attachment theory people believe that in the first years of a child's life, what's really important is not teaching numbers and letters, and it's really playing with the child, trying to establish this bond with the child, okay? And then they looked at, okay, so let's look at activities that are about establishing bond. It's singing with the child, playing peekaboo with the child, right? Ticklish the child, just like, hide your face and things like that. Where is the gap the largest across socioeconomic stratus? Well, it's exactly at 0 to 2, which is the age at which developmental psychologists believe children are developing these bonds. At age 3 to 5, it's about getting your child prepared to go to school. It's a school readiness. How do we do this? Teaching numbers, shapes, colors, words, etc., etc., etc. At what ages are the differences more the largest? Exactly at the time that children have those skills. And when they become adolescent, it's not about teaching them, like playing peekaboo with them. They're gonna look at you like, what you're doing? You're just embarrassing me in front of my friends. It's about managing time. It's about making sure that they actually get things done. It's about making sure that they don't get engaged with activities or people that are not good for their future, right? What is the largest amount of the difference? Exactly at the point in time that the children are actually going through those paces. So I have to skip a few things. This is more of the same, and it's the home, okay? So schools. So in schools, we have a huge problem because we don't actually do a lot of measurements in the schools as we actually have seen right now. The way we look at schools is we look at a component that is called the value-added component. Now, the value-added component has many problems, one of which that I'm pointing to right now is we don't know if it's only cognitive. We don't know if it contains some version of socio-emotional or not. The second thing is you can actually, to some extent, if you give people incentive, you can actually guide them to do very well in standardized tests, even though they may not be learning a lot, okay? So here's what I'm going to do. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show to you that, to some extent, in spite of all of the problems, value-added might be one of the best things that we have anyways. But the way I'm going to do this is a study that was done in Ecuador. They're going to randomly assign students to teachers. And you want to do this because you want to make sure that the good teachers don't get the good students. You want to make sure that all teachers get exactly the same type of students, at least within the school. Okay? And then they're going to collect a lot of data on teachers. And this is the class instrument. So what the class instrument does is basically measure 3 different things: emotional support, classroom organization, instructional support. So emotional support, they claim that the 2 most important are classroom organization and instructional support. Classroom organization is a lot about if you have a disruptive student in class, how well do you do in terms of preventing that student to disrupt the entire class? Can you address that very well? The other one is when students actually make a mistake, do you give them proper feedback or not? Okay, so this is the and the other one, emotional support, it's a little bit difficult because a lot of it depends more on the students than on the teachers. So to some extent, teachers actually have power over that, but if I give them 100 extremely disruptive teachers, even the best teacher in the world will have a hard time. So they controlling them. So this is why emotional support is not super important. I'll share the papers to people who are interested in. So here are the interesting things. If you measure teacher quality in terms of value added, which the way we usually do, then 1 standard deviation in value added of the teacher, 11% of standard deviation in math, 13% of standard deviation in language, 7% of standard deviation is executive function. So I want you to say these are large impact, but remember that by the time that the kids are 14 years old, the difference is 1 standard deviation. So even if you actually can do 13% of standard deviation in language, you still have 87% of difference, which is still very large, okay? Teachers who are good in teaching math are also good in teaching language, at least for kindergarten students. And teachers who are good at teaching language in 1 year are also good in teaching language the other year, which seems to point to something that is a stable trait, not something that fluctuates according to the class that they get, okay? The interesting thing is almost everything that teachers are doesn't predict how good they are. So it's not IQ. It, to some extent, is experience. Look, if you actually are assigned a rookie teacher, you get 16% of the standard deviation less, which is more than moving someone in one standard deviation in the distribution of the quality of teachers. Part of it is something that we can train, and the reason why I say that it's something that we can train is a lot of the things that are in the class instrument are things that one could actually implement a teaching training program, and it explains 60% of the standard deviation in student learning. So it's relatively large. And the other thing is parents know who the good teachers are, but they don't react to it. Okay, so all that I want to say is the following. Schools matter. No one is going to say that schools don't matter. Teachers matter. No one is going to say that teachers don't matter. But remember when I was talking about the difficulty of measuring quality of skills? I think that we have even a more serious problem that we don't actually measure the quality of what goes on inside a classroom. To some extent, we have given up on it, and I think we shouldn't. Okay? So here's the sad part. Remember, the low-income kids, they're getting less quality of parenting at home. And then when you actually look at the kind of teachers that they get, so here are effective teachers. Here are blue are not effective teachers. These are high-income children. These are low-income children. Now, a lot of people are going to say there's going to be some matching. So this is not by chance. But the question here is, if I get a high-quality teacher and I score 13% of a standard deviation more in language, and a low-income kid get one standard deviation teacher, a worse quality teacher, worse than average quality teacher, he's going to get 13% of a standard deviation less than the average, so the difference is now going to be 25%. So now this goes a longer way towards explaining the differences at age 14 that we actually see, okay? So by the way, it's not only the quality of teachers, it's also advancement placement classes. And it's also the number of team sports that they actually participate. Now, you may think, why team sports? Team sports will not create, they're not going to learn math and language. Probably not. But there's something about brain development that occurs during adolescence that is super interesting. We become social during adolescence. Okay? And there are many ways that you can show this. One of the most interesting ways is a video game that you play by yourself or with a peer. Here's the video game. You have to get from A to B. The faster you get from A to B, the higher your score. But between A and B, there are traffic lights. You can choose to ignore the traffic light, but if you do so, you may have a crash, right? So there's a trade-off. I want to get fast, but I don't want to get in a crash, right? So by the way, this has been done now, mice cannot play video game, but we can simulate the same stories with mice, with monkeys, and it doesn't matter. I'm not talking about something that goes on in the brains of humans. I'm talking about something that goes on in brains of at least some animals, okay? So here's what goes on. So I'm going to ask adolescents to play this game alone. And how many of them will actually choose to ignore the red light? 45% of them. Then I ask them, you're going to play this game, but I'm going to put your best friend sitting next to you. Okay? You know what happens in this case? Look at what happens. They become more likely to actually do the risky thing. And you know why? Brain development is so interesting at that age. We reward areas of the brain much faster than we develop the parts of the brain that tell us don't do something stupid. Okay? What's super interesting about this is that if you actually put the adolescent, but you tell the adolescent, oh, your friend is not here, but the friend is actually in the next room looking at you play, whether it's true or not, but if he believes that this is true, he will behave as if the adolescent peer was just next to him. What's super interesting as well is put an adult in the room now and put all the adolescent peers, they don't behave during the risk-taking anymore. Okay? So when you talk about all of these extracurricular activities, a lot of the importance about that is because, not because they actually teach language and math, but because it prevents them from doing activities that are risky activities just because they want to look nice or they want to be popular, you know, in front of their peers. Okay? So, yes.
You said this is true for mice?
This is true for mice and for monkeys.
But mice's best
Yeah.
friend next to them,
They behave riskier, in riskier ways, and also monkeys. It's fascinating, isn't it? I thought this was like, and by the way, they've done different versions of the game because,
if you put it an adolescent mouse,
Yes.
next, they take risky behaviors.
They-
but you put an adult mouse.
they stop,
Wow.
right? So by the way, it's not by chance that when you're 16 years old and you're learning to drive, there is an adult person with you, right? So we all feel much better that this person sitting next to you is not another 16-year-old person. Can you imagine what our world would be like, right? Okay, so by the way, in schools, do in fact, they impact the formation of cognitive and social-emotional skills, okay? So I'm not gonna go through this because I'm running out of time. Let me show to you that what I've showed to you is pretty depressing, right? Now let me show to you that it's worse, okay? So now don't commit suicide when you leave this room. Here's what's going on. Every measure of everything that we've seen is actually becoming worse over time, okay? Inequality in skills across economic groups. So this is inequality across racial groups. This is inequality in skills across economic groups. Across racial skills, it has decreased. Now it's a little bit stable. Inequality in skills in income groups actually is increasing and continue to increase, okay? Social trust, I'm going to talk to you today about social trust because it's one of the most important skills that we actually have because it relates to perspective taking. Inequality is increasing in that too. In health, obesity is increasing in that too. And why is it increasing? Again, because measures of investments in children that were already unequal, they are becoming more unequal. Time used between parents and children increasing over time. The amount of resources that parents invest in children, financial resources, increasing over time. Even trends in family dinners, how often families actually pair up with their children to talk about the day. It's actually increasing over time. And the quality of participation in all of these extracurricular activities, inequality is increasing over time. Okay? And now we come full circle because we started with an unequal society. We're becoming more unequal. And then as a result, this skill formation is becoming more and more concentrated among the top income groups. So it's the reason why it's difficult to increase the supply of skills is because we have not had success in increasing the fraction of the children from the lower income groups that actually go to college. But not because we don't give them access, but because we actually fail them from basically birth all the way through college, okay? And here, and I think I'm going to stop here. Yes?
Only if we have time. So, just a point of clarification, investments.
Yes.
What do we mean by investment? Again,
Yeah.
going back to my previous question, is it just monetary investment?
No.
Because I think
Oh
that's-
no, it's like language. You know, like if you tell me, it's very interesting. Here is something that we report from the study that we were doing in Philadelphia. A child picks up a book, comes to and walks to the mother, and just tells the mother, you know, like gives, you know, like she wants. It's not even that she wants the mom to read the book. She just wants the mom's attention and doing something with the mom. A highly educated mom, I'm not even going to use the word income. And sometimes it's not even education. It's a high perception mom that this really matters. What she's going to do is she's going to say, yeah, sure, we're going to do it. Maybe if she cannot do it right now, she will say, come with me. We're not going to do it right now, but we will do it in 5 minutes, okay?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
totally understood what's meant by that word. It's just I don't like that word per se because investment, when we say investment, we assume something like a capital investment
No.
in stocks and bonds.
Oh,
Children are
no,
stocks
no.
and bonds.
So right now you're investing in human capital. You're not spending money.
Yes, but yeah, I agree with that, and that leads to a semantic issue because some of the authors from the articles that you assign, I think because they use that word investment, they just kept primarily thinking in monetary terms. So I think they gave like extra money to some poor families, and then they were surprised why there was no change among kids.
Yeah.
And like, that's not how it works. Like, you can't just shower them with money and hope that.
No, and I'm going to talk about that, I promise. Yeah. So I'm making so many promises that I don't know if I'm going to keep all of them. But I want to at least go back to this because it's a lot about what I'm doing nowadays, which is how much of it is, if you go back to Ariel Khalil's picture, right? How much of the non-engagement, it's not that they're not engaging with the child. They are engaging with the child, but they are not engaging with the child on activities that are optimal given the child's age and the stage of development that they're going through. So it's not a question of just giving them money. It's more than giving them money. It's actually something else.
And that's the root of the problem. If we want to finish on a very depressing note, it cannot be remedied just by giving money.
No. And I'm not.
It's much harder.
It's much harder. It's a much worse problem.
Maybe impossible.
No, I don't think it's impossible. No, I don't want you to die today. No, I don't. No. So in the next part, when I come back, I'm going to show to you that it's possible to change the quality of the environment. When I change the quality of the environment, I change skills. When I change skills, I change social outcomes. Okay. Some of the programs are small programs. One of the programs are actually large and has been around for many years, but it has some problems. I'm going to promise you, I'm going to address that. Okay. The only one thing that I would like to say that I think I failed in, that I neglected, is Lance Lochner and Philip Bailey published a paper about 10 years ago, and it's still true to this day, looking at this college enrollment process, because it has, to some extent, it has increased, as you saw, college enrollment. Even though college graduation is not clear that it has increased. It has increased for females, not so much for males. What's really interesting is when they looked at income groups, college enrollment for the high income groups increased because low ability children from high income families started going to college. Okay? And what's really interesting about their choice is that they actually apply to colleges that are not very different from the level of ability that they have. Okay? For low-income groups, what happened was it's the high-ability children that started going to college more often. Okay? But instead of applying to colleges that have the type of students that they have, they actually apply to colleges that are not anything like the type of peers that they have. So this is not across economic, this is not across over time, it's just a shot. This is Avery and Huxby, 2012. But what you see here is high income groups, the children from the high income groups, what they tend to do is to apply to colleges that have the students near their ability, whether they are high or low. They have a few schools that they're considered safety choices, which means that the students here are not as good as what they are. Very few of them are actually going to apply to a local community college, or low community college applications is a small share of the colleges that they're applying to. And they're applying to a lot of colleges. What you see for the low-income families, what it is unlike the high-income families is first is their application, it's like maybe 2% of their applications are for schools that have the type of students that they are. A lot of their applications are for their local community schools or even for-profit institutions. Now this turns out to be horrible because the for-profit institutions, low-quality for-profit institutions are the ones that explain most of this crisis on student loans. Okay, they have very bad graduation records, and even if you graduate, it doesn't really mean that actually you're going to get a high-paying job to have enough money to do this, to pay back your loans. And to some extent, a lot of them are actually community colleges as well. So they also have very low graduation records. There is, to some extent, there is some action. And Hawksby and Turner have a randomized controlled trial that say, let's look at the high ability guys that are applying to non-selective institutions and tell them, do not do this. Apply to highly selective institutions because you're low income, you're going to get a fellowship to go there. So you're not going to have to pay money. It's actually going to be much cheaper to attend Stanford, Harvard, Yale than to go to your local community college. And they actually show some success. The problem is high ability, low income children, unfortunately, they are a minority. So there's just so much that you can do in terms of matching, improving the matching of low income students to high quality colleges, even if you look at the high ability students. If we need for us to change in a sustainable way the dynamics of inequality, what we need to do is to increase the number of children from low income families that are college ready, okay? So far, let me tell you where the story is going, because the story is incomplete. But first is inequality is increasing. Part of this increasing inequality in economic inequality is the decreasing growth rate of supply of skilled labor. So we are not producing skilled labor as fast as we used to produce, and because of that, whoever has the skills nowadays are commanding higher prices than the ones that don't have. This decrease in the rate of the skilled labor is because we are not producing college-ready kids from low SES families. For college readiness is correlated with cognitive and non-cognitive skills whose production starts at birth. Oh, let me continue here. 5, inequality in the production of skills is correlated with inequalities in investments. And 6, inequality in investments is increasing, in cognitive skills is increasing, and non-cognitive skills is increasing over time, okay? So now I'm going to start telling you what happens. So far, can't say that the story that I've told you is causal. What I'm going to talk to you about right now is what happens when you change the environment of children when they're young, what happens when you change the environment of kids when they are at school age. And I'm not going to have time to cover all different interventions. I'm going to cover a few. The few I selected to cover are the few that actually have long-term follow-up. One of the things that we've learned is that it's easy to produce interventions that work very well in the short run, but they're not sustained in the long run, okay? So there are promising interventions that have been implemented in the last 2, 3, 4 years, but just because they have been implemented in the last 2, 3, 4 years, we don't know yet if they're going to have long-term implications. My sense is that some of them will. I'm going to try to show to you what are the ones that have long-term success in terms of producing skills, improving social outcomes. What are the commonalities that they have, and what are the things we should be looking at, okay? Okay. So here's, so you probably heard Heckman talk a lot about the preschool program, about the abecedarian program, infant health development program, and also about the Head Start program. So these are early interventions. Another one that I want to talk about is intervention in school age years that is known as the Montreal Longitudinal Study. It really started in Montreal Experimental Longitudinal Study, which really started in the 1980s. So Perry starts in the 1960s. Perry is a 1.5 hours per day of basically preschool for kids who are 3 and 4 years old. Okay, 1.5 hours per day. So it's not full day. It's really interesting because if you look at what's really phenomenal and innovative about the Perry at the time was the curriculum that they had. Okay, so it's not a curriculum about teaching children directly numbers, letters, etc., etc., etc. If I were to explain it in very simple terms, it's a curriculum that has 3 parts. It's plan, do, review. So kids are exposed to a menu of activities, and they plan which activity they're going to do. Okay, so they literally go to the board. They see a board with their name. This board has magnets with the description of pictures of the activities. They go there. They pick one of these magnets and they put next to their name. And they say, in the next half an hour, this is what I'm going to do. And then they have to explain to the teacher and to the students, fellow students, why they want to do that activity, how they're going to do that activity, what they expect to get at the end of that activity. Then they do it. They go their separate ways. Each one of them does their own thing. If you've seen a preschool program in any part of the world, it's pretty impressive because you don't see kids fighting with each other or, like interrupting each other. No, they all go to their own side of the classroom and they all do the activity that they planned that they were going to do. Once they are finished, the time is up, they come back, they show the work that they did not only to the teachers, but also to the fellow students. Okay? And they explained what they learned from that activity, what they liked, what they didn't like, what they felt frustrated about, etc., etc., etc. Okay? So it's pretty impressive if you actually visit a preschool program. I encourage all of you to actually do it. It's fascinating. Most of the time when I visit childcare places, what usually happens is, who is that strange person? And they all come to me because I look really weird. Okay? And I have an accent. So they become super interested. When I visit a school that has the high scope curriculum, which is the preschool curriculum, I think that most of the time they didn't even realize that there was a strange person in the room because they're so focused on what they're doing. Okay? So it's different because it's not teaching repetition, 2 plus 2 is equal 4, 2 plus 2 is equal 4. That's not the game, that's not the point. The point is learning by doing, but learning to plan, to do, and to review, which is different from almost every other program that was there at the time. Okay? Head Start, when it was created, Head Start had decided to adopt the high scope curriculum, which is the Perry curriculum. Unfortunately, nowadays, Head Start is whatever they want, whatever the Head Start Center wants to be. So only about 30 or 40% of the Head Start centers actually use the Perry preschool curriculum, the high scope curriculum. Most of them actually don't. They are free to choose. Unfortunately, many don't choose any curriculum whatsoever, which is one of the big problems, okay, so that you should keep in mind. Abecedarian is a similar curriculum, but much more intensive one. And one of the differences is abecedarian, so Perry started at age 3 and 4, abecedarian started at age 3 months and went all the way to age 5. Actually, went all the way to age 8, but most kids were, the randomization protocol for early childhood stopped at age 5. There was another randomization between age 5 and to age 8. It's full day instead of only 1 hour and a half per day, but it's again the same type of curriculum. It's not based on, let's just teach stuff that that we believe is important by making the children repeat, but a lot of it is plan, do, review as well. Infant health and development, so preschool 60s, abecedarian 70s and 80s. Infant health and development program is a program that was targeting low birth weight children, but using exactly the same curriculum that abecedarian did, which is not very different from the curriculum used by the preschool program. Okay? The infant health and development program, it's really looking at two classes of children, low birth weight, less than 1.5 kilos, less than 2.5 kilos, and then very low birth weight, less than 1.5 kilos. Okay? Now, it's true that children that actually have low birth weight are less likely to attain full potential. And this is one of the things that they wanted to test. Can we have early intervention for those groups? One of the advantages of the infant and health and development program is that it didn't look at income of the parents. So it only looked at the child's birth weight. That's the only reason why they were into the program. Now, they could be in the control group or treatment group, peri, abecedarian, IHDP, randomized control trials, Head Start. Most of it is not a randomized control trial, but there was a few years ago a Head Start impact study. I'll talk briefly about it because it's tricky to talk about that. The interventions at school age that I'm going to talk about, it's one that has a commonality across many of the promising ones that we see nowadays. So I don't know if you've heard about Becoming a Man intervention. There is also the Toronto Youth program. They all look at social development. So the idea here is not trying to teach these kids how to read better, even though they're not reading that well, but it's actually teaching them social skills. Now, it's going to be important to do that because of this age of development during adolescence. And here, I'm saying adolescence, I really don't know what time adolescence starts, and we really don't know what time adolescence ends. Okay, so this is one of the difficult things to pin down. Traditionally, adolescence is, we say adolescence begins at puberty. For females, it's easier to establish a day that you became adolescent. For boys, it's a little bit harder. It's the way it's been traditionally done was the age at which a boy left a choir, because they go through voice transitions, and you don't want to have someone who's going through voice transitions in your choir. It's going to disrupt things. If you look at those two biological markers, the ages of adolescence have been decreasing over time. Okay, so most people now believe that by age 10, most kids are already adolescent. The program I'm going to talk to you about were programs in which kids were 8 and 9 years old. They are not too different in the type of activities of curriculum of the types of programs that have been done in the last 2 years, 3 years, 4 years with students in high school. It's about teaching literally social skills. You know, if you answer me a question, I don't start knocking you, right? So again, in most situations, most people you deal with, you don't have to worry about asking a question and getting punched back. In some situations, unfortunately, that is true. The simple act of asking a question might lead to a violent exchange. The second, so this is, some of it is, I'm going to say, is aggression control. Some of it, I'm going to say that it's actually trust. And trust in a broader sense. It's trust in the sense of understanding someone's perspective. Okay? It's something else that we only learn and develop when we are adolescents. Okay? The other component of these interventions that target school-age children are teaching them to stay in task, focusing, which reminds me a little bit of these measures of locus of control, that you have to believe that you can affect things in a positive way. Okay? So all of these studies that I'm going to present well, not the Head Start, but the Perry, Abecedarian, Infant Health Development, and the Montreal Longitudinal Study, all of them have long-term follow-up. All of them are randomized controlled trials. All of them collect data on cognitive and not cognitive skills. All of them follow up with some data on outcomes that we care about that are not strictly skills. So graduation, participation in crime, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is why I chose these 4. There are many other interventions that use things that are similar, but they don't necessarily have a randomized controlled trial. Didn't include them. They have a randomized controlled trial, but they are very recent, so we don't understand, we don't know yet. There's no time for us to find out if they have long-term implications. I didn't include them. And the other thing is the ones that didn't work, even though they had long-term and were randomized controlled trials. Okay, so let me show. So this is from a paper, a very nice summary of this literature, Heckman and Elango, Garcia, and Heumann. So one of the things that you have to be very careful when you run randomized controlled trials is when you collect too much data, too many outcomes. I'll try to increase the font sizes in a minute. So suppose that I run a randomized controlled trial, and I collect data on 20 different outcomes. Let's say 5 different measures of cognitive skills, 10 different measures of non-cognitive skills, and then 5 different measures of behavior. What is the probability that at least that I will find that impact on at least one of them? If I want to use a significance level of 5%. What is it? I have 20 different outcomes. Let's say that they are all independent, which usually they're not, but let's say that they are all independent. I've collected data, ran this randomized controlled trial, and then I collected data on 20 different outcomes. What is the chance that, what is the probability that just by chance I'll find that at least one of them, yeah? That at least one of them will be significant, yeah. What is the probability? Yeah. 1 minus 20 times 5, 0.5 to the power of 20, which is 64%. You know what happened with Perry? You know how many outcomes they have in Perry? 715. What is the probability that at least one of them will actually be, that you would find something true, or some impact, even if it's not true, in at least one of them? You know what the probability is? 100%. Okay, 100%. So when you're doing randomized controlled trials and you have lots of different outcomes, and it's totally fine to have lots of different outcomes, because sometimes progress in science, in theory, is made precisely by collecting data that uncovers things we didn't actually expect given current knowledge. So it's totally okay to collect lots of data. The only problem is you have to be very careful because you might have a lot of false positives. Okay? So the way to address false positive, one way to address false positive is known as the Bonferroni rule. The Bonferroni rule is the following rule. So if you chose a significance level of alpha percent and you have 20 different outcomes, what you do is you test each one of the different outcomes, but you only accept the ones with a significance, with a p-value lower than alpha divided by 20. So if your alpha is 5 and you have 20 outcomes, really now you can only accept those whose p-values are below 0.25%. If the events are independent across, if the outcomes are independent, this turns out to be a very good rule. The problem is in most situations the outcomes are actually not independent because they actually were, children in the treatment group were subject to this intervention. So maybe they were working groups. And maybe the outcomes that you chose are very related just by their nature. So they're different versions of the same type of cognitive skills. Okay? So that, in that case, turns out to be extremely conservative. Now, another way to do this is the following. Let's start from the situation in which you believe that there is no impact. The null hypothesis is that the intervention had no impact, right? So now think about this from the following point of view. So I have here a randomization. Person A came here, this is treatment, this is control. Person 1 came here, person 3 came here, person 4 came here, person 2 came here, person 5 came here, person 7 came here, 6, and then 8. So that was the randomization. Okay, so these 4 guys got the treatment, these 4 guys got the control. Okay? Suppose that the intervention had no impact whatsoever. Do the analysis the following way. Instead of regressing outcomes using these guys as treatment and these guys as controls, just switch a few people who are in the treatment and the others from the treatment. You just tell them, oh, I'm going to pretend that I made a recording error. Someone who is treatment actually I just classified as control. Someone is control I just classified as treatment. If the intervention had no impact whatsoever, the rate of false positives when you use the true randomization and the rate of false positives when you use this made up wrong classification should be exactly the same, correct? Right? So this is one way that you can actually do this. If you have hundreds of outcomes and you want to test whether your intervention actually had an impact or not, you can just do the permutation test. Permute people from control to the treatment group and treatment group to the control group. If it is true that there was no impact whatsoever, it should be the case that the permutation, whether you use the true randomization or a fake one, should lead to exactly the same rates of false positives. Okay? So this is what these guys are doing here. This is Heckman has been using it in different programs. Now, it's trickier because each one of them didn't have the perfect randomization we would like to have. And the reason why is because, well, some families had a child that was 3 years old and another child that was 4 years old. It made no sense, for example, to say one child gets to be control, other child gets to be the treatment. So you have to do, if you're going to do the permutation test, you have to do the permutation correctly in the sense that you have to do it by respecting the way that the randomization was actually done, okay? And if you do it, what's interesting is you can start looking at what happens by saying, what is the p-value that you can reject the null, okay? So then IQ at age 5, Perry, Abecedarian, IHDP had an impact. IQ at age 8, not so clear anymore for Perry, some mild impact for Abecedarian, almost certainly no impact for the IHDP. A measure of not cognitive skills, conscientiousness, which is a little bit to impose control and planning. Some impact at age 4 to 7 at Perry. No impact. No impact at Abecedarian. Some impact here, mildly positive, maybe for IHDP. If you look at achievement test score at age 27, achievement is not IQ. It's probably a combination of IQ and not cognitive skills. What you're going to see is some impact for the Perry, some impact for Abecedarian at age 21, no impact for IHDP. I'll come back to this in a second. You're going to see that there is something quite interesting about IHDP. Yes, go ahead. So this is truly, you have to adjust the standard errors if they are, if you're worried about some form of dependence across individuals or dependence across the outcomes, but it's not enough to adjust standard errors because you have so many outcomes that the probability that even after you account for all the dependence, the probability you're going to find a false positive increases with the number of outcomes that you measure. So it's not necessary, it's not, even if you had perfect independence, that issue would still go happen to be true, right? I mean, so it might become more or less problematic depending on the nature of the correlation across error terms, but it doesn't go away, okay? Okay, so it's interesting. These are males. These are females. Differences I'm going to show to you in a better picture in a second. But basically, what you see here is, for some reason, okay, so this is, I think, what is females and what's males? So this is females. And the reason why I know females is because it seemed that the following thing happened for males, as you can see here, but not for females. This is cognitive skills. This is IQ. This is the thing that drove them to actually do the experiment. Okay? So they wanted to change cognitive skills of these children, not socio-emotional skills. So part of it is the language. Okay? So one of the most interesting things that you see when you visit a peri-preschool program is the amount of language interaction that there is. Why? Because when they're planning, they have to express what they want to do, they get feedback. When they're doing, they don't talk so much, but they may ask questions about how to do things, and the teacher never tells them, you do it this way. It's interesting. The way the teacher does it is by trying to guide them to think about the problem, never giving them the answer, which leads to more language. And then when they're reviewing, guess what? They're using language again. So the amount of language interaction within a high-scope curriculum is much greater than the typical child care place you're going to visit in the United States. Okay? And here's what happened. This is normalized so that the mean is 100 in the US population, and the standard deviation is 15. Okay? Look at this. When they start, they are over one standard deviation below well over one standard deviation, 1.3 standard deviations below the mean when they start in this program. So it's not that we're talking about low-income children, because low-income children at age 3 will not necessarily be 1.3 standard deviations below the mean in cognitive development. It's really low-income children who are severely lagging behind by the time that they are 3 years old. Okay? And what you see here is within the first few months, so this gain here, this is age 3, this is age 4, they are maybe, what, half a standard deviation below the mean, okay? Most of the gain that happens in here, Andreas Heumann has a thesis, happens actually in the first 3 months of the program. So it's very fast. Very little gain between age 48 months to 60 months. By this time here, they actually leave the program. When they leave the program, they go to schools, the same type of schools that the controlled children go to. They came from very similar families than the children of controlled children came from, because this is a randomized control trial. And what you see over time is that IQ converged back, right? So one of the questions that I always have, and it's a counterfactual question, and I don't know the answer to this question, is suppose that the children in the treatment group had access to extremely high quality schools. What would their cognitive skills develop like? Another question that I would love to ask is, suppose that the control kids now, but not the treatment kids, got high-quality schools. What would have happened with their cognitive development? I don't know the answers to those questions, but as a scientist, knowing the answers to those questions are super important because they tell us at what points in time we should focus investments. Okay? Okay. So this is what's going on here. By the way, this doesn't happen for females. Females maintain a small difference in IQ. And it doesn't happen for a abecedarian either. But remember, abecedarian, they continue the program until the kids are 8 years old. So we don't know if and it's also an entire day. So I don't know if this is a dosage because of 8 hours a day versus 1.5 hours a day, or a dosage in the sense that it continues all the way through age 8 instead of age 3 and 4. And also it starts at age 3 months. Sorry, let me blow this up. Let me see if I can blow this up here, because I can see it and I'm so close to it. So here you go. So in terms of long-term outcomes, first you have to understand that you have lots of different outcomes and we have very small sample sizes here. So it's 145 for Perry, 123 for Abecedarian. So you're pretty, so when you say, when they do the permutation test, they are operating a world a little bit like this. They're dividing alpha by the number of outcomes that they have. It's not 715 because they're not trying all of the outcomes at the same time. They're saying, I'm going to look at educational outcomes, I'm going to look at crime outcomes, I'm going to look at health outcomes. But they are trying to do with small samples this type of adjustment. Okay? So instead of looking at 5%, they're trying to look at a fraction of 5% of significance level. And what you get is cognition and IQ, some impact for females and Abecedarian, no impact for males. High school graduation, borderline at 10%. Maybe if they had 5 times the sample size, we could be a little bit more secure about what they find here. Economic outcomes, employment at age 40. For males, some impact. For females, not. And again, part of it is probably that the point estimate is half, but it could also be the case that the sample size is much smaller. In any situation, female employment is not as common as male employment to this day, although they have been catching up. Labor income, some impact is small, but some impact for females. Health insurance provided by employers, some impact for males, not for females. Everyone welfare. By the way, this is not cherry picking anymore. This is literally saying, if I do the permutation, these are the ones that I can reject, that the simple permutation will not be equal. Okay? So everyone welfare, a small reduction for males. Crime is very interesting. You're going to see something explaining why crime. Some impact for males and females for crime. Lifestyle, which is not exactly what you would like to have, but if you use drugs, males less likely in the Abecedarian. Smoking, maybe all of this is borderline significant or not. And physical activity only for females in Perry preschool program. Let me go through this, because one of the things that I'm now going to say, let's look at the outcomes that we know that there was a positive impact, that we can say with confidence that when we do the permutation test, there was an impact. It was not just a false positive. What we're going to do here is the following. Oh, sorry. Let's decompose the impact on change. This impact happened because of changes in cognitive skills, changes in non-cognitive skills that were measured, and changes in changes that were not explained by either cognitive or not cognitive skills that were measured by this study. The not cognitive measures that were measured by this study were relating to internalizing behavior. So let's say that you say something aggressive towards me. An internalizing behavior person is the one that I start having, like stomach aches, I feel sad, depressed, I don't talk to anyone, I go to my room. Or externalizing behavior, you say something to me, I start punching you. Okay? So as it turns out, now people might have externalizing behavior in certain circumstances and internalizing behavior in other circumstances. There's no, if someone starts punching you, you don't want to be simply the internalizing behavior guy. Yeah, sure, I will not even protect myself, right? So there are optimal responses to each one of the situations, whether it's internalizing or externalizing. What's interesting here is blue is externalizing behavior, is the share of the finding of the treatment effect that you can go back and document because it's changing externalizing behavior, given that they measured it for controlling treatment groups. Red is the cognitive factor, cognitive skills. Green is academic motivation. So a test score that measures how much you learned in school will be primarily picked up by academic motivation. That's not so impressive. But if you look at almost all the other things, arrests, felony arrests, adult arrests, income, tobacco use, more arrests at different ages, and employment. Do you see cognitive skills there? No, right? And you couldn't because at age 5, by age 10, cognitive skills had converged, right? So there was no difference in cognitive skills. So cognitive skills couldn't have changed, at least for males. But when you look at females, then it's interesting because you start picking up some cognitive factors, some academic motivation factors, and we have no idea why this is the case. So there is no reason to believe that the curriculum as it was designed would lead to more academic motivation among girls but not among boys, and more non-cognitive skill development for boys more than for girls, relatively speaking. Okay. But here you go. I wanted to document the following. I want to document that you exogenously change, investment that leads to more skills, although not all the skills I would like to see, and better skills leads to better economic and social outcomes. So this reinforces, it's not completely the finding, but it reinforces that at least part of the story that I was telling you is actually causal. It's not as great as I would like to be, but what's interesting is, given all these findings that come from Perry abecedarian, there are now a lot of countries all over the world that are doing randomized control trials using versions of Perry, using versions of the abecedarian program. So we will have more data with larger sample sizes. Head Start is very interesting. Head Start, a lot of the Head Start studies actually were not coming from randomized control trials. A lot of them actually, so all of these papers that you see here were based on observational data, okay? And then trying to account for endogeneity by different methods. Fixed effect, instrumental variables, regression discontinuity. This is the most recent paper by Carneiro and Ginja. There are the Head Start impact study. This is, the Head Start impact study is very interesting for one reason. First is randomly assigning a family to get an offer for Head Start or not to get an offer for Head Start among the Head Start centers that chose to participate in the randomized control trial. And what happened in many locations is the following happened. So you are in location A, you have five Head Start centers, 4 child care centers that are a lot like Head Start. These guys here chose to be in the randomized control trial. These guys here chose not to be in the randomized control trials. And these guys here were not even offered to be in the randomized control trials. So now, what does it mean to participate in a randomized control trial? Because when we were talking about Perry and abecedarian, at that time there was no close substitute to them. So if you didn't get Perry, it's not that you could walk down the road and get something that looked like Perry. Here, if I don't get an offer, if I'm randomized out of this Head Start center, well, this Head Start center here is not part of the study. So I can go there and ask my child to be there, but my child is a control child for this Head Start center here. And maybe I don't want to go to this Head Start center. Where I want to go is to this center here, okay? So, in other words, what we're doing here is the following. You have so here is for a family that is in the treatment group, what the randomization is doing is it's telling you your choice set is Head Start Center 1, Head Start Center 2, blah, 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 Head Start Center 1 that offered you the vacancy and participate in the study, Head Start 4, which didn't choose to participate in the study, Child Care 1 to Child Care 5, which didn't choose to participate in the study. And if you were in the control group, what you get was Head Start 4, and then C, Child Care 1 to Child Care 5 that are not Head Start and are not in the randomized control group. Most people, when they use the Head Start impact study data, they actually do not account for the fact that about 30% of the kids in the control group actually end up in a Head Start. Okay? It's the Head Start that didn't choose to participate. Okay? And a lot of the kids who are in the control group, they go to one of the other child care places that are not Head Start. Okay? So these two guys actually account for the fact that this randomization is not a perfect randomization because it can't be given the choice set that families have. And they find different results from other people. Unfortunately, they didn't look at all the outcomes. They only looked at more immediate outcomes because these are primarily papers developing the methodology. But I think that there is a huge opportunity here to apply the analysis for other outcomes that are available as well. But what's interesting is, even after you, remember that I started saying that the Head Start program actually is very similar to the peri-preschool program, in the sense that about 40% of the program of the Head Start centers use the same high scope curriculum. And what they find is, even after you account for the choice set of the parents, that you find impacts early on in cognitive development. And by the time the children are in school, by the time that they are 5, 6 years old, no impact anymore. Observational studies seem to point to the fact that there are long-term implications, and the long-term implications are very similar to the type of implications that people documented for the peri-preschool program. Yeah, go ahead.
If you could comment on the incentives that these preschools and Head Starts face in terms of deciding whether to participate,
Mm-hmm.
both as an interpreter of this research and someone who would want to maybe do research related to this. You know, when I saw like the preschool results and you're showing IQ, I'm thinking, okay, probably they're not teaching to that test.
No.
The way we worry for high school students.
Yeah.
Students, but I still wonder, are they choosing to participate or not? Are they
Sincerely,
trying to show that off?
yeah,
Or worry they can't show something good?
I don't know. So what I do know is the following. People have documented that the quality of child care, the quality of Head Start centers is very heterogeneous. And the main complaint that a lot of people had about the Head Start impact study is they didn't have even enough samples to say, let's first visit the centers and see which ones are high quality and which ones are not high quality, according to some form of usage of a curriculum, of a well-established curriculum, and then let's do the randomization within these groups. Because maybe the relevant policy question is not whether we should have Head Start or not have Head Start, is what type of Head Start we should have. But I don't think we actually have good data to answer this question. Even though people have been saying this, I've heard this for at least 15 years. I was a graduate student. I remember people complaining about this. And recently I was reading this literature and I realized the first paper written on this topic was more than 20 years ago, 22 years ago. At that time they were already complaining about the variability in the quality of Head Start, right? Which is very interesting because when I read about this, the first thing that came through my mind is if you go to Starbucks, this is like a strange experiment. You go to I'm from Brazil, so you go to Starbucks in Brazil. How can it be that Brazil, a country that has its own coffee culture, when you enter Starbucks in Brazil, it's exactly as Starbucks as Hyde Park or Chicago. People enter Starbucks in Brazil not to drink the coffee as we drink coffee in Brazil, but to drink coffee as we drink coffee in the United States. And I'm not saying anything bad about coffee in the United States. It's not a statement about coffee in the United States. It's a statement about quality of implementation. And it's very interesting that we have quality of implementation in coffee, in the way we drink coffee, but not in the way we actually interact with children. Isn't it fascinating that we care so much about making sure that it's coffee at Starbucks, whether you are in Singapore or in San Francisco, cannot be very different. But it's okay if Head Start in this street is very different from Head Start in that street. So to me, this is like mind-blowing. And I'm not saying about small differences in interaction. I'm really saying about large differences in the quality of interaction, okay? But I don't want you to think from my presentation that this is all early because it's early. Actually, I think that, let me just say something to you about IHDP. What makes the IHDP really interesting, and I'm sorry about this being cut off. It was okay in my computer yesterday, somehow was no longer okay. What I'm going to show to you in the first few lines actually go all the way to age 8. Just believe me, I can send you the table. IHDP has high and low income families participating in the program. So there you have a set of families that are high income families that were randomized into control and randomized into treatment, but also the same thing for low income families. Some of them were in control, some of them were treatment, and the sample size is now close to 1,000. So it's 10 times the size of a Becedarian, etc. It was done in the mid-1990s, so now the kids are close to their 20s, in their 20s, okay? I don't know if they're planning to do a assessment, visit them again. I don't even know if they actually have the capacity to do so. If they maintain records, it would be great, because IHDP is supposed to be exactly like a Becedarian for the low-income kids. What was really interesting is by age 3, by the time that the kids are age 5, there is no impact when you look at all families that are treatment. There is no impact on IQ anymore. However, the impact on IQ continues to be true for families that are low-income families, all the way to age 8. They're analyzing now the data at age 19. I don't know if it's going to be true, but that tells you that if we're going to do interventions that are going to improve skill development, I'm going to go back to that point. The ones that for whom we need to improve the environment, for which we need to improve investments, are not the high-income kids, are the families coming from low-income, are the kids coming from low-income families. Okay. Unfortunately, the IHDP is the only study that enrolled both high and low-income samples, but now people are looking at other dimensions of the data to see, is it the case in other dimensions of human capital? The same message is true. So the Montreal longitudinal study is really about 3 things. Have you seen this test before? You probably have seen this test before. So they do this when you arrive at a graduate school in economics. I'm just joking, actually. We don't, but maybe we should. It's about, part of the Montreal experiment is about developing aggression control skills, impulse control skills, and also what they call trust. But what they call trust is actually very related to perspective taking, okay? Here's a test that is very interesting. So pretend that you are on this side of this object here, and then there is another guy who sees some of the objects, but doesn't see all of the objects because, for example, this one here is blocked from his view, this one there is blocked from his view, but not these two. So that guy over there, what is a small ball is this one, because the only 2 balls he sees are these 2. For me and for you, the small ball is that one because we get to see all the 3 balls. It's a very cool game you can play with your nephews, okay? Especially as they age. Start when they are 6 years old, and you tell them, move the small ball. Which ball do you think they're going to move? This one here, right? What they see as the small ball, right? It's super interesting because they can't actually still understand the issue of perspective from someone else's point of view. Okay? So they still can't do it. Early childhood programs will not change that. It's just the mental capacity has not been developed yet. The areas of the brain responsible for these types of skills, they have not been activated yet. Okay? They're going to start to be activating not even after puberty sets on. It's actually a little bit later, because they're about the development of this part of the brain. Puberty, when it first actually hits you, it develops the parts of the brain that are associated with reward, the ones that really deep inside your brain, but not this part here. It's fascinating because if you go back 500 years ago, puberty didn't start until age 14, and this part of the brain started developing at age 17, 18. So you had 4 years in which you're exposed to doing stupid things just because of your reward sensation seeking. Nowadays, puberty starts at age 10, but this guy here doesn't develop until 17, 18. So now we went from a period of 4 years of exposure to bad decision making to a period of 8 years of exposure to bad decision making. Okay? What's really interesting is as individuals age, what you see are two things. They start doing better on this task, even though you're not training them to do better in this task, number one. But you still see a lot of variability, socioeconomic gaps across those things. So if you're going to invest in interventions that develop skills, you have to start thinking of what are the types of skills that individuals are developing at the time that they are going through the school period. And those types of social skills, perspective taking, aggression control, impulse control, are the ones that we know are being developed at that time. The Montreal study is doing exactly that. What they are doing is control and treatment kids, were kids that were rated as teachers in kindergarten to be either violent or very impulsive or not very trustworthy, they were not trusty they didn't trust other people or other situations a lot of times. Okay? So what they did is, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to create a group of peers. Okay? And by the way, a third group that had nothing to do with it was a group of well-developed children that were not in control, were not in the treatment, were not part of the experiment. But you had the treated children, what they had was this group meetings with other peers. It's a group of 5 individuals and an adult person. Remember the adult person when you're driving? The adult person is there. Five guys. 4 of them are actually well-behaved, but not the 4 that I'm saying are this reference group. 4 guys that are well-behaved. 1 guy that is badly behaved. Okay? Doesn't have aggression control, doesn't have impulse control, doesn't trust other people. And in these groups, they're talking about how to ask a question. If someone asks you a question, how do you respond? If you believe that someone is trying to do something weird, you actually try to make sure that they are trying to do something weird before you actually act. So you start taking perspective. You don't react by becoming aggressive at the first occasion. And you actually learn how to interact with other people. Okay? The reason why this is super important is because if you walk across Midway here, what you're going to see is the Chicago Crime Lab. They're doing something that is known as the Becoming a Man program, and it's actually very similar. But instead of operating 4 guys that are well-behaved with 1 guy that is badly behaved and an adult person, it's all of them are badly behaved with adult people. But the adult person is actually mentoring them. How do you react to a situation like that? But it's always about what is this, it's aggression control, impulse control, perspective taking. Okay? These are the things. So far, Becoming a Man is showing a very large impact on reducing violent behavior, reducing participation in crime, and actually improving how well they're doing in school. What you're going to see here for the Montreal longitudinal study is something that's similar. The difference is now they have data that goes all the way to age 25, because this thing started in late 1980s, early 1990s, when they were 8 and 9 years old. Okay, so here is what's going on. So what you see here are 3 groups of people for each one of those skills. So this is aggression. let me do one thing here that maybe might help us. Okay, in this, oh, sorry. So this is trusting at age 10 and 13. Remember, what they wanted is to actually change how trusty these guys were. But, okay, so this is the control group. This is the treatment group. This is the group of individuals that were well behaved, not part of the experiment, not part of the intervention. They were not the 4 guys that were sitting with the, because you might imagine that what could have happened is the 4 good guys become 4 bad guys, and the bad guy continues to be a bad guy, right? So you could, I mean, presumably, you can't rule out that explanation. So here's difference between control and treatment in guys, in trusting, how trusting they were. Aggression control, again, difference between control and treatment, guys. Very interesting. Oh, this is impulse control. Sorry that I did this, but this is impulse control. Control, treatment, the reference group of well-behaved kids. This is something that is very interesting because it's a little bit like the Perry program. This is being held back. The program starts at age, takes place when they are 8 and 9 years old. No difference in being held back when they are 10, 12, 14, and then at some point, this differences in skills seem to be the explanation of the difference in profiles. By the way, these are, if I plotted the standard errors, I would be able to reject that these curves are actually different, okay? If you look at outcomes when they are adults, reduction in the number of crimes, but they are not committing as few crimes as the guys that were well developed. A little bit of an increase in diploma in secondary school. A little bit of a decrease, an increase in whether they were either study or actually working, and a little bit of an increase in whether they, in that they were socially engaged with a different group, okay? How much of these skills are how much of these gains are actually decomposed by cognitive versus non-cognitive skills? In grades, it's not cognitive skills. It's actually non-cognitive skills. By the way, this is not new. If you look at the work by Angela Duckworth, she was going to say to you that grades are primarily driven not by how smart you are, but how hard you work. Because teachers know how hard students actually work, and they tend to give grades not based on outcome, how well they studied, the work was actually done, but actually how much effort it was put in. And you would think that the teachers were wrong, but actually what's really interesting is the higher the grades that these guys get, the better outcomes that they're going to have when they're adults. Reduction in special education, reduction in the probability of being held back at any point in time, and I forgot about what the secondary actually, oh, sorry. I'm confusing now graphs. This is total increase in how much of the R square of the gain is due to cognitive and non-cognitive skills. It's about an equal share for cognitive and non-cognitive skills. If you look at held back, again, non-cognitive, the impact of the program seems to have operated primarily through its non-cognitive skills. And the diploma for the secondary education, again, seem to have been more primarily come from these non-cognitive skills than cognitive skills. And this is more of the same, if you can look at this. It's just when you break this down by what types of skills were actually affected by these programs was attention control, attention impulsive control and trust. This idea of perspective taking. Let me, okay, so now I don't have as perfect data as I would like to have, but the story that I would like to tell you is inequality is increasing. This increase in inequality is primarily because the growth rate of the supply of skilled labor has not increased at the same rates as it used to increase. Part of it is because we have had a hard time getting low-income children to go to college. It's difficult to get low-income children to go to college because college readiness starts early at birth and continues to go all through their lives. There is huge inequality in investments that make these the investments in these skills that lead to college readiness. And now I'm going to try to say something about when should we invest, okay? And there is this wrong perception that it's early or late. And the story is far more complicated than a simple story of early or late, okay? So here is what I would like to tell you. So I have, I think I might actually show everything this time. It's the first time. Okay, so here's what I want. Here are the two things that I want to do. I want to break this up into two components of skills. One component of skill is, I'm going to call self-productivity. I'm going to say that this component of skill is self-productive, is if I learn how to read. Reading is so basic that reading gives me access to actually learn more skills, okay? So I learn how to read gives me access to books, I read books, I learn, okay? Even if no one taught me anything, I would learn just because skills can create more skills. This is the notion of self-productivity of skills. Another notion is the notion of dynamic complementarity. This is a far more difficult notion than simply saying skills produce more skills. Is that dynamic complementarity is the notion that it may be the case that for me to learn how to do math, I need to know how to read books. In other words, one thing is to say, if I know how to read, I can learn math. Another thing is to say, I can only learn math if I know how to read, okay? Because I may be able to learn math even if I don't know how to read, just by someone teaching me math, right? But dynamic complementarity is telling you that some skills can only be produced, or the returns to investment in some high-level skills are higher for individuals that have already developed lower-level skills, okay? It doesn't need to be true. It can be exactly the opposite. It could be that what we are talking about is a pattern of dynamic substitutability, which means that it's easier to teach people advanced stuff if they actually have not learned new stuff, okay? Old stuff, okay? So in certain circumstances, actually that helps. So for example, a typical explanation is trying to get someone to learn a new programming language, given that they have used the same old programming language for 40 years. If the new programming language is extremely different from the old programming language, it's very, very difficult, okay? It might be easier to teach someone who knows nothing about coding to begin with to acquire the new skill. So you can have dynamic complementarity, you can have dynamic substitutability, okay? So how does it actually get worked out? So let me say, this is now where you're going to complain a lot, but don't. Don't complain too much right now. I'm just making a simplification of the world now. This is just a simplified theory. I just want to get some intuition about what is going on in the pictures that I showed to you. So here's what I want to do. I want to produce a level of human capital using the minimum amount of investments that I can actually do. So let's say that what I want to do is to produce a PhD in physics. I'm asking the question, what is the lowest cost way to produce someone that has a PhD in physics? Okay? That's the question that I'm asking. So I want to minimize, and see, this is a little bit strange, because look at this. I have now, I'm really simplifying things. I'm saying there is the early period. Let's say that this is pre-school period. Then there is the late period. This is the school age period, all the way through the end of college. This human capital is a combination of the skills I learn when I am young and the skills I learn once I go to school, once my school age period starts. How easy it is to substitute this dynamic complementarity parameter is captured by this phi guy. If phi goes to minus infinity, then I can't easily replace these types of skills with these types of skills and the other way around. If phi goes to 1, then I can easily replace these kinds of skills with these kinds of skills here, okay? Now what I have here is R, is the interest rate, because one possibility is to say, I am going to only invest in kids when they reach school, so for the first 5 years of the child's life, I'm going to buy a government bond. It pays me 2% interest rate. compounded this is going to give me about 11.5% by the time that they are 5 years old. I then, instead of investing X, I invest 1.11 times X. So I have more money. Okay? So what I'm doing here is just bringing to present value. I'm saying this is money I have to spend now. This is money I have to spend in the future. This is how much it costs me to bring money from the future to the present. That's all that I'm doing. Okay? So what is going to happen? So let me start with some cases, some extreme cases. Extreme case number one is perfect dynamic substitutability. If you didn't learn anything when you were young, that's okay, totally fine. You can still learn a lot of things when you're older. In this case, I have to decide on two strategies. One strategy is I only invest early, perfectly substitutable. There is no reason for doing both times. Or I only invest late. If I invest $1 early, I produce gamma units of human capital. If I leave the money on the bank and invest only late, I'm going to produce 1 minus gamma times 1 plus R. And I'm going to invest early if and only if self-productivity of skills is super important. This notion of if I learn new things, I can acquire more things, then I want to invest early. Otherwise, I want to invest late. The other case is the case of complete dynamic complementarity. There is no substitution ever that is possible. In this case, I have to invest both early and late. I can't have only early skills because the early skills don't help me do the types of jobs that require the skills that I learn late. And I can't only have late because with late I can't learn, if I don't have the early skills, I can't learn the late skills. So this is a case of full dynamic complementarity, in which case I want to invest exactly the same amount early and late. And then I have all of these cases in between of minus infinity to 1, and what you get is this ratio. What you get, the early to late ratio depends on two things: how much self-productivity there is. The higher self-productivity of early skills, the more I'm going to invest early. The less dynamic complementarity, so the less dynamic complementarity there is, the more sorry, the more self-productivity there is, the more I'm going to invest early. Okay. And obviously, if the interest rate is super, super high, what I want to do is to leave the money in the bank and try to do some of that stuff later on because I get a very high interest rate. So the returns to investing money in the stock market are going to be very high. I can buy a lot more things by the time that the child reaches the late period. Okay? So here's what goes on. What goes on here is how much the ratio of early to late investment, which I plot here as a function of the skill multipliers. This is the case in which is perfect dynamic complementarity. This is reaching the case in which there is perfect dynamic substitutability. How much I'm going to invest depends on knowing these two parameters. Okay? Now, everything that I told you, I can rewrite this entire model by saying I have different dimensions of human capital. I have cognitive skills, I have non-cognitive skills. I have dynamic complementarity for cognitive skills, I have dynamic complementarity for non-cognitive skills. I have self-productivity for cognitive skills, I have self-productivity for non-cognitive skills. And I also start having cross-productivities. Learning how to do, having impulse control impacts how much I can actually learn in cognitive skills. Learning cognitive skills might say, I may actually start reading books about the development of emotional intelligence, which might improve my development of social-emotional skills, non-cognitive skills. Okay? So we can make this model a lot more complicated, and then the picture of what's early and what's late now has to be set in terms of each one of these dimensions of human capital. Okay? Each one of these dimensions of human capital, which means that if we're going to talk about ways to intervene to reduce inequality, we have to find what outcomes are sensitive to cognitive skills. What are the outcomes that we see we would like to reduce inequality in these outcomes? Are they sensitive to the formation of cognitive skills, or are they sensitive to the formation of non-cognitive skills? If they are sensitive to the formation of cognitive skills, then we need to see what is the self-productivity for cognitive skills, what's the self-productivity what's the dynamic complementarity for cognitive skills. The same thing goes on for non-cognitive skills. Okay? So turns out to be a little bit more complicated if you write it in that way, but here is self-productivity, cross-productivity, response to investments, and the quality of the parents that you have. Okay, so capturing a lot of different things. And then this is dynamic complementarity for cognitive skills, and at different stages of your life cycle, there might be different dynamic complementarities as well. Okay, so you can do this. Here's what I want to tell you. Let me show to you what I could show. Let me just show to you what it means. Because what you get here when kids are young for cognitive skills, you get a fee that is actually closer to 1, not perfectly close to 1, but close to 1, but not perfect 1, which doesn't mean that you should do only early to begin with, okay? Especially because if you look at self-productivity of skills, it's not that high to begin with. If you look at as the children age, what's really interesting is, well, here is the sensitivity to early to investments in cognitive skills. It's high, it becomes smaller. Here is self-productivity is not that high, it becomes larger. And if you look at what's going on with the dynamic complementarity over time for cognitive skills is becoming bigger, which means that if you're going to invest early, what these numbers are telling you is the following story. Suppose that you invest a lot early, but you have this huge dynamic complementarity. If you have this huge dynamic complementarity, would you like to not invest in cognitive skills at all when they are older? If you have lots of dynamic complementarity? You would like to invest more, right? So what we find for cognitive skills is investing early is probably important, but you don't want to invest only early. You actually need to continue, which gets me to the point of the preschool program. What would have happened to the kids in the treatment group if they actually had been exposed to high-quality schools? The numbers that I see here suggest that, I don't know if this is true, but what this number suggests is that the impact should be even higher if they had had higher quality school, once they actually reached school. Yeah?
So are we looking at this problem from the perspective of parents?
No. So I'm looking at this problem from the point of view of Donald Trump, but I doubt that he would understand that. But that's the idea. The idea is how we actually, as a society, if the goal here is if we were to actually do things in a way that minimizes cost, we would invest early, but we would not put a lot of money early if we didn't put any money late. That's what we're saying. That's what these numbers are saying.
Yeah, because it seems to me that the reason why the results seem so muddy is not very clear which program exactly has the direct contribution to improvement of cognitive skills.
Uh-huh.
The fact that we are not looking at families themselves. So if the family is dysfunctional, the father is a drug addict, and the mom is doing some horrible things
Yeah.
as well, then regardless of how much money you invest.
Oh, but it's not money. See, this is not, no. No, actually, I would say that early investment, probably most of it is not money. A huge majority of it is actually not money because it really is the quality of the interaction that they have with children. Exactly. So for example, yeah.
Good interactions that they have.
But that costs money. See,
That costs money.
that costs money.
Regardless of what they get outside of families, if the dynamic within the families themselves, if the environment there is toxic and which
Yeah.
is not healthy,
Yes.
it doesn't matter how much.
No, that matters. So here's the preschool program. And I didn't say this, and I should have said this. What the preschool program got was most of them, actually the majority of them were single moms, very low income moms that didn't have a lot of schooling themselves. But what that showed is you don't have to change the entire family to be able to produce more skills in children. You do need to change the environment, at least some of the environment in which they're exposed to. In the preschool program, it was changing the environment for 2 years for 1.5 hours per day. The question that you're asking and the question I am asking, and I have no data to show other than simulations from a model, is if we had invested more than 1.5 hours, but also more at what happened after they left Perry, probably the impact would have been greater, even if we had not changed the families in which they were born. Okay? Now, Perry did accomplish things. This is data. This is not randomized controlled trial. We can go back and we can ask, could we have done better? Probably so, but we didn't change the families. See, the families in the control and the treatment group, they were single moms, they continue to be single moms. They were poor, they continue to be poor. They were not talking a lot to the children, they continue not to talk a lot to the children. But you were able to lead to long-term changes in outcomes, even though the economic circumstances, social circumstances of those children didn't improve a lot. Everything shows to me at this point is the impact would have been even greater had we changed their families, yes. Would the impact have been even greater if we had changed the quality of the schools? Yes. How much? We don't know. Theory will tell me some guide, but theory is just theory, right? I mean, we can build theory based on very good facts, but it's still theory. So I don't know. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
So there's also a lot of research that shows that people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, they have a belief maybe that they're not able to grow within the society.
Yes.
So I was just wondering, let's say you invest in early childhood development. To what extent does the belief that people that are not able to grow crowd out the investments?
Okay. I'm working a lot on belief. I could teach one. Okay, let me show to you something. I have maybe 20 slides on belief. I don't know if I'm going to go through them, but I'm happy to talk to you about belief. I do want to talk to you something about what I mentioned before, and you asked the question of measurement error. So this is, when we published the paper, here's what I'm telling you about. You see what's going on in here? 20%, and then as things go, the mode is more like maybe 10%, maybe. Nothing above 30% of signal versus the rest being noise, right? What I did not know at the time was this. The measures of investments that we use, unfortunately, are extremely good to separate really bad home environments from okay home environments, but not really good to separate okay home environments from really great home environments, okay? So I'm going to show to you the properties of what I mean. You may have heard IRT, the words IRT, right? So it's a very simple model where all the variables here are either 0 or 1, so they're binary variables, and I'm trying to figure out from these variables how informative they are about the quality of the environment that they have. So you can have a question that is this type of question, this green type of question. What this green type of question is telling you is that when parents give an answer, there is so much variability across parents that the difference between someone who is 2 standard deviations below the mean and 2 standard deviations above the mean is actually not that great in the probability that they actually are doing something good. I have one type of question that is going to be very sensitive but very easy. 50% of the families who are 1 standard deviation will do that type of investment. And I have the questions that are super sensitive, even more than the black one, but they are still very easy. Easy question, not very sensitive. Lots of families are doing things. Difficult question, super sensitive, very informative about this part of the distribution. Not so easy question. For you to find families that whose probability of doing that type of activity is 50%, you have to go all the way to 2 standard deviations above the mean. But it's also not very sensitive, meaning you can't separate much guys that are here from guys that are here, okay? You would like to have IRT tests that are like that. Super sensitive is spread over all over the support of the distribution of the investments that you would like to have. And each one of them would be super informative about different parts of the distribution of investments. And when you construct a test score, it's almost a linear relationship between the score in the test and this underlying variable that you would actually like to do. And it could tell you a lot of things, as the blue line says. From a lot of people, there are between 2 standard deviations above the mean and 3 standard deviations above the mean. You're really very well characterizing 95% of the distribution. Yes, 5 minutes, I know. 5 hours? Okay. Here's the data that we actually use. Look at this. Most of the questions are concentrated around this area that only can separate horrible from okay, actually from horrible from very bad. Because this is -3 standard deviations below the mean. This is 2 standard deviations below the mean. Look at this. Only informative about that part of the distribution. And when you compute a test score, look at how this becomes super nonlinear at this point. Someone might score 35 and be at the mean. Someone scores 41 is 3 standard deviations below the mean. Almost no difference whatsoever. Highly nonlinear relationship. This is the data that we're working on to do all of this work that I told you. Okay? And what happens? If you were to estimate a production function, even if you had a randomized control trial, even if you had everything perfect going for you, the measures would still lead to biases in your results because guess what? They can't separate okay from great. They only separate horrible from not so horrible. Okay? And this is the thing that I wanted to say. Belief. You asked the question about belief. It is true. So, by the way, nowadays, instead of Hart and Risley, we actually do this device. You attach to the child's clothing, runs for 16 hours, 2 days. You can then do a lot of data decomposition. Very reliable. But, you know, this is the interesting part. You know whether it's TV. So this particular recording here started at 9 a.m., finished at 8 p.m. This is silence. The child went to bed. So we decided not to look at any of the data after 8 p.m. But look at this. This is meaningful conversation, meaning parent and child are interacting so close to each other that you actually know, you can recognize the words, the computer can recognize the words that are being exchanged. This is distant, meaning the parent is talking to the child but not close enough. So even though we can detect the voice of an adult person, we don't recognize the word. So it's either not talking to the child, or if it is talking to the child, it's actually not a highly interacting kind of activity. TV time, a lot of parents believe that we actually can't differentiate between TV and their voice. This is what gets for you very easily. Adult word counts, conversation time counts, and child vocalization counts per hour. Child vocalization is one vocalization. Mommy, I want a cookie is one vocalization. It depends on the child's age, so it's so difficult to do this. Here's what always happens 95% of the time. We give the device to the mom says, I'm really going to pretend that I'm a high investment mom. I'm going to talk a lot in the first hour. I'm going to blow their minds, 8,000 words. And they think we don't know any better. Look at this. Conversation time counts. They are talking, you know, they have the child on their lap, they call their friend on the cell phone, and they think, see, I'm gonna blow their minds. They actually don't, because what we're looking at is not this guy here. What we're looking at is this guy here. And conversation time counts for this particular child was actually very high at 3 hours. Not particularly very high number of adult word counts at that time. Okay. By the way, what we're doing is now a randomized control trial in which we tell moms, this is brain development as far as language development is concerned. Here's how well you're doing at the baseline. I'm going to give you a target to improve language environment that your child is exposed to. The child is going to add this device. I want you to record it, give it to me. I'm going to tell you how well you're doing. So this is, again, it's an intervention that is particularly aimed at language development, but providing parents feedback about how well they're doing. And the hope is, will this information change their beliefs? Because in the first round of the study, when they were still pregnant of their first child, we asked the question about how do you believe you can impact your child's development? And most of the low-income mothers, the answer was 1 order of magnitude below what we actually find in terms of the impact of investments on child development. And now we're trying to say, can we change beliefs by providing them information about how their child develops language and how they're doing in terms of language development in the environment that they are exposed to? And the answer that I'm going to give to you is, I don't know. One thing is, and this goes back to philosophers. Philosophers have been concerned a lot about beliefs. And belief is not necessarily formed by facts. And because beliefs are not formed by facts, facts may actually not affect their beliefs. And in fact, what people might do is that they may search for facts that confirm their beliefs, even if the facts that confirm their beliefs are only present in 1% of the cases. So is it a question of belief or is it a question of information? Those are two different things. If they are misinformed, given the information might have large consequences for the way they interact with the child, but I can see the situation in which they think about the world in the following way. My child will go to a very bad school. Does it pay for me to spend a lot of time with my child? Does it pay for me to invest a lot in language development of my child? Or should I teach my child to learn how to be disciplined, well-behaved, because otherwise he's going to get into trouble in school? You see what I'm saying? So I don't know. It's a great question. It's an empirical question. I hope that by next year I'll be able to answer it. Yeah, go ahead.
Do you worry, though, that it's not so much this rational calculation by the parent in the low SES household, but rather they're feeling really stretched for time?
Oh, it could be. Yes, there is this, yes. I'm trying to,
Cognitive burden.
exactly, the load, yeah, load, yeah. There is work in psychology and behavior economics pointing not necessarily to parenting, but to other circumstances in life, right? So for example, you just ask someone the question of, they go into a mall, shopping mall. Then they ask you a very personal question. How much money do you have in the bank? Say $500. What happened if they stole your car? People, like, they actually have very bad ways of dealing with only the thinking of, right, of they're going to steal my car. Oh my God, then my life is going to fall in disarray because I have all these other things. So there is another story that you can connect to it here, which is the story of the way we form expectations depends on the things that are more relevant to us at the time that we're living them. So it's rational inattention. It's another way to focus this. And if I am a person who tomorrow I don't know if I'm going to have money to buy food, I am now really worried about trying to find money to buy food for my child tomorrow instead of having, like the capacity, the cognitive capacity to focus on this task given everything else that I'm doing. So I think that these are great questions. I will, if there is anything that I can finish this with is the following. We have a problem, and this is not only a problem in the US, other countries have the same problem in terms of the production of skills, okay? The production of skills in many countries, not only the US, has actually been decreasing, the growth rate of the production of skills. A lot of it is because the type of families that were easy to increase the skill production of their kids, they have already increased the production of skills in their kids. The difficulty is how to incorporate a large fraction of the population that actually is not producing skills right now. And we need to change the environment that they're exposed to for much earlier sets, for much earlier stages of their life cycle. And the problem is, I'm telling you that we don't even know necessarily how to measure investments.